The world remembers the rise of drug empires. It rarely remembers the moment control was lost. That moment did not come with explosions or sirens. It came quietly, inside courtrooms, prison cells, and congratulatory headlines. When Frank Lucas was arrested, America believed it had won. In the early 1970s, newspapers called it justice. Frank Lucas, the man who controlled Harlem's heroin trade, was gone. Politicians praised the war on drugs. Law enforcement celebrated the fall of a kingpin. To the public, it felt like progress. But history would later reveal something far more dangerous. America had not defeated the drug trade. It had simply removed the last man controlling it. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you are watching from. And if you love true crime cases, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Frank Lucas was not powerful because he was violent. He was powerful because he was efficient. He bypassed traditional crime families, secured his own supply, and built a direct pipeline that cut costs and increased control. His empire was centralized, quiet, and disciplined. Most importantly, it was American. Drugs entered the country, but Americans controlled distribution, pricing, and territory. That mattered. After Lucas, no American drug lord replaced him. Not at his scale. Not with his reach. Not with his discipline. Instead, the market fractured. Small crews replaced large networks. Violence increased. Control disappeared. Law enforcement focused on arrests, but demand remained untouched. Drugs still sold. Money still flowed. But leadership was gone. The war on drugs was designed to remove individuals. And it succeeded. But it never addressed systems. By removing American kingpins, the war unintentionally created a vacuum, a massive gap between supply and demand. And vacuums invite replacement. While American authorities celebrated, something changed beyond their view. Cocaine production in Colombia expanded rapidly, processing improved, transportation methods evolved. For the first time, producers realized they no longer needed American intermediaries. They could move the product themselves. This realization would reshape the world. American drug lords had always operated inside the system, bribing, hiding, adapting. The next empire would operate outside it. It would not fear American courts. It would not depend on American streets. It would not collapse with one arrest. And somewhere in Colombia, someone was paying attention. At this moment, Pablo Escobar was unknown. No headlines. No legends. No fear. But he was watching. Watching America remove its own guardians of the drug trade. Watching a global opportunity open. The empire that would change the world forever had not yet been named. But it had already begun. Frank Lucas did not just run a drug operation. He built a blueprint. And when he fell, that blueprint died with him. Before Frank Lucas, American drug power followed tradition. Italian crime families controlled supply. Street gangs controlled territory. Violence enforced order. Lucas broke that structure. Instead of inheriting power, he redesigned it. He cut out middlemen, secured his own source, and focused on logistics rather than intimidation. Drugs were cheaper, purer, and more consistent than anything on the street. Dealers switched willingly. Power shifted quietly. This was not chaos. It was management. Lucas centralized everything. Supply, distribution, money, and decision-making flowed through him. That centralization created efficiency. It reduced leaks. It limited conflict. For a time, it made him untouchable. But it also created a fatal weakness. When law enforcement finally understood Lucas's system, they did not attack the streets. They attacked the center. Corruption networks were exposed. Surveillance improved. Once Lucas was arrested, the entire structure collapsed almost instantly. There were no independent cells to continue operations. No alternate leadership ready to take over. No system designed to survive his removal. The empire was over because the man was gone. After Lucas, many tried to replicate his success. None succeeded. The environment had changed. Sentences were longer. Surveillance was smarter. Corruption became risky. Any American criminal who attempted centralized control attracted immediate attention. Visibility meant prison. Ambition became a liability. Without a dominant figure, the American drug trade fractured. Small crews replaced large networks. Violence increased. Reliability decreased. No one controlled pricing or supply consistently. Law enforcement misread this chaos as progress. In reality, it was decay. Because chaos creates opportunity. American drug lords faced a problem they could not solve. They operated inside the system they were fighting. They lived under the laws they were breaking. The more successful they became, the more visible and vulnerable they were. This limitation would define the end of American dominance. While American networks collapsed inward, producers abroad saw something new. Demand was strong. Distribution was weak. Leadership was gone. For the first time, the source realized it could become the center. The future of the drug trade would not belong to street kings. It would belong to suppliers. Frank Lucas proved one man could control an American city. His fall proved no American could control the future. That future was already forming beyond U.S. borders. And soon it would have a name. When Frank Lucas disappeared from the streets, something else vanished with him. Control. Not control over crime, but control over the system that fed it. The American drug trade did not end after Lucas. It multiplied. Without a dominant figure, dozens of small groups rushed to fill the gap. Each wanted territory, each wanted profit, none could impose order. Violence increased because no one was in charge. Prices fluctuated, quality dropped, trust disappeared. This instability made American networks easier to attack and easier to replace. Law enforcement interpreted fragmentation as success. More arrests, more raids, more seizures. But every arrest created new opportunities. When one dealer fell, three more appeared. When a crew disappeared, another took its place. The system adapted faster than the state. American drug lords faced a structural problem. To scale, they needed visibility. To survive, they needed invisibility. Those goals were incompatible. Any organization large enough to control supply attracted attention. Any figure powerful enough to set prices became a target. So growth stopped. Ambition died. While American criminals struggled, producers abroad saw clarity. The demand was stable. The roots were weak. The leadership was gone. Colombian cocaine producers realized they were no longer just suppliers. They were the future. If they controlled transport, they controlled everything. For decades, Americans had controlled distribution. Now, production began to dominate. Cocaine labs expanded, processing became industrial, transport methods evolved. The source was no longer passive. It was strategic. This new era required a different kind of leader. Not a street boss, not a neighborhood king, but an organizer. Someone who understood logistics, redundancy, and scale. Someone who could operate outside American jurisdiction. That person was already moving quietly. By the late 1970s, the transition was irreversible. American drug lords no longer set terms. They followed them. Power had shifted away from the streets and toward the source. The empire that would change the world was forming, not in New York or Miami, but in Colombia. And its architect was still unknown. Power rarely announces itself. It builds quietly, piece by piece, while attention looks elsewhere. That was how Pablo Escobar began. In the early days of the cocaine boom, Pablo Escobar was invisible. He was not the loudest trafficker. He was not the richest. He was not the most violent. That invisibility was intentional. Escobar understood that American drug lords failed the moment they became visible. Frank Lucas fell when the system finally focused on him. Escobar made sure the system never noticed him, at least not yet. He stayed behind the scenes, learning, adjusting, and preparing. Escobar did not see cocaine as a street product. He saw it as an industry. Production had to be reliable. Transportation had to be flexible. Distribution had to be distant. Each part had to survive independently. This thinking separated him from rivals who chased fast money and public dominance. Escobar chased sustainability. He wanted an empire that could survive arrests, betrayals, and even death. The collapse of American control offered a clear lesson. Centralized power dies quickly. Local dominance attracts attention. Violence creates enemies. Escobar inverted those rules. He decentralized operations. He avoided controlling American streets. He used violence sparingly and strategically. Fear was a tool, not a lifestyle. While American gangs fought over neighborhoods, Escobar focused on movement. Routes mattered more than blocks. Logistics mattered more than loyalty. Small planes moved cocaine through the Caribbean. Boats followed different paths. Redundancy ensured that no single failure could stop supply. Every route was temporary. Every route was replaceable. This flexibility made the operation nearly impossible to map. Escobar did not demand loyalty. He demanded results. Anyone who moved product efficiently was useful. Anyone who caused attention was removed. There were no emotional ties, no permanent alliances. This cold approach prevented the formation of rival power centers. Everyone depended on the system. No one controlled it alone. As shipments increased, profits multiplied. But Escobar avoided excess. He did not flaunt wealth. He did not seek recognition. He did not challenge rivals publicly. The empire expanded without drawing attention. Law enforcement saw drugs moving, but not who was moving them. Every growing system reaches a point where invisibility becomes impossible. For Escobar, that moment was approaching. Money creates gravity. Influence attracts scrutiny. Success leaves traces. The unknown architect was about to become known. And when that happened, the world would finally notice the empire that had been forming quietly in the shadows. Power can hide only for so long. Eventually, success becomes too large to ignore. That is when the name appears. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar's operation was no longer small. Shipments increased. Routes multiplied. Cash piled up faster than it could be cleaned. This was not a sign of failure. It was a sign of scale. But scale brings problems that secrecy cannot solve. Money leaves footprints. Banks notice. Officials ask questions. Rivals grow curious. Escobar realized that invisibility alone could no longer protect him. Escobar adapted the way he always did, by changing the rules. Instead of hiding wealth, he redirected it. Entire neighborhoods were built using drug money. Poor communities received housing, roads, schools, and clinics. Where the state had failed, Escobar appeared to succeed. To many people, he was not a criminal. He was opportunity. This loyalty created protection more powerful than silence. Journalists began connecting dots. Where was the money coming from? Who was funding these projects? Why did criminals protect certain areas? At first, the name appeared quietly. Not on the front pages. Not in warnings. Just in internal reports. Pablo Escobar. For law enforcement, the name meant little at first. For rivals, it meant something else entirely. A new center of gravity had formed. This phase was the most dangerous of Escobar's rise. He was no longer invisible, but not yet untouchable. Frank Lucas had fallen at this stage. Escobar knew the risk, but he believed influence could replace anonymity, that loyalty could slow enforcement, that power could be negotiated. This belief would define his next moves. As cocaine flooded U.S. cities, American agencies looked outward for the first time. The problem was no longer street gangs. It was supply, and supply pointed south. International investigations began, cooperation increased, Colombia entered the spotlight. The name Pablo Escobar moved from whispers to files. American drug lords responded to pressure by hiding deeper. Escobar chose visibility. He believed that being known and protected was safer than being hunted in silence. It was a gamble, one that would reshape the world. Once the name was known, there was no way back. The empire could not disappear. The roots could not stop. The market could not shrink. The system had outgrown the man. Escobar had crossed the line between unknown architect and historical figure. The next phase would not be about building. It would be about survival. When Pablo Escobar's name became public, the world believed the story had finally begun. In reality, the most important part was already over. The system was complete. History often focuses on faces. Frank Lucas, Pablo Escobar. But drug empires do not survive because of men. They survive because of structure. Escobar's rise marked the moment when the drug trade stopped depending on American leaders. Control had shifted to production, logistics, and distance. That shift could not be undone. The American model had relied on centralized figures operating inside the system. Once that model collapsed, it could not be rebuilt. Surveillance was permanent. Sentences were final. Visibility was fatal. No American drug lord could dominate the trade again. The center had moved. After Escobar, the trade did not disappear. It fragmented intelligently. Smaller groups replaced large empires. Violence became strategic, not constant. Visibility decreased. The system learned to survive. This evolution was the true legacy. The war on drugs was designed to remove individuals. It succeeded repeatedly. But every removal created an opportunity. The market adapted faster than policy. And adaptation is power. The empire that changed the world was not Escobar alone. It was the realization that crime no longer needed a face. Production stayed abroad. Distribution became outsourced. Leadership disappeared. The trade became global, flexible, and resilient. That was the irreversible change. Frank Lucas represented the last American-controlled era. Pablo Escobar represented the first global one. Between them lies the moment history turned. Not with a war, not with an arrest, but with a shift in power no one noticed. The drug empire that changed the world forever was not built in one city or by one man. It was built when America removed its own guardians and left the system behind. And once that system learned to survive without leaders, it could never be erased.